Welcome back to BCB Live Safety Struck. You are struck by safety here. And let me tell you something, we are continuing on with some of our interviews about supply chains and about supply chain difficulties. And you know what? We're bringing in another great expert, another great person here as we do. Mauricio, are you there?
Hey, thanks for having me. I gotta say that I love your intro. I love what you guys are doing with the trucking community, the trucking industry. I always say that the trucking people are the backbone of every industry and every economy in the world. I'm Mauricio Solano, Director of Operations with the Supply Chain 101.
And okay, so let's do that. Let's talk about what is Supply Chain 101. What is that? If I don't know what that is, tell me what that is.
Right. So the need that we're trying to fill in and the one that we're filling in is the current, well, there's two main problems. Changeovers and turnovers between supply chain teams and the new need for new skills that are occurring in the supply chain. So we're facing new challenges and we're filling in those challenges with knowledge. There's around two different areas of supply chain that we're facing for need of professionals, which is trucking industry and supply chain professionals for the planning, logistics, and distribution.
And when you talk to these people, you talk to everyone within the industry, right? About what's going on and about solutions when they encounter problems, right? That's basically what you guys are doing.
Right. So we're helping supply chain managers and pretty much at CXOs and VP levels with their problems or their current needs to level up their skills in their headcounts. And well, from what we've seen is that they may have new people coming in, students getting out of college, or perhaps they're changing industries. So what we're doing is helping those people getting the skills to ramp up quickly, so they can overcome the current challenges that we're facing in our global supply chain.
So you're basically just a little bit different than a normal or just another educational institution. Your direct focus is within just our industry, right? So you're grabbing those guys, those people, those gals out there, and kind of giving them the skill set for immediate effect in here. Just because you come out of college with a business degree doesn't mean you know a darn thing about logistics, right?
Right, and our value added is twofold. First, we build a community. So we're developing currently an app. It should be launching next week or so. And all of our current students will be joining this community so we can all be together sharing our problems, how we're facing those problems. And number two, what we do is supply chain transformation. So once we go into a company or a industry and we start to teaching people, we're not only telling them best practices, policy making, and new skills, but we are also helping them deploy supply chain projects to improve their companies.
So when you do that and you talk to these people, what are some of the genuine challenges that you have or that you face immediately when you grab these students or these people? What are some of the most I guess what I would like to know, and as we talk about it, what are some of the things that really pop out that you give them the knowledge that they didn't really have before?
Um, Well, actually, we have two types of challenges. Challenges from people who have 30 years of experience, 20 years of experience, and people who are recently joining the ranks. I was once told that you can have 30 years of experience, but those 30 years of experience are from decades ago, and now we're facing new challenges. So what we've seen is the culture and change management of changing the status quo is the most complex of us. So we may have a status quo of doing policy making from supply chain practices from decades ago, but those practices are already outdated from the new challenge that we're having, the new logistics that we're having, and the new global industry that we're having. So we're helping with the change management by doing these transformational programs. And with the new people, what we're actually doing is helping them by introducing them to business cases and best practices of the new way of doing supply chain planning.
You talk about that, and I'll tell you, it wasn't. It's really only been recently that in every household and every single person is I guess getting better knowledge on supply chain disruptions. There wasn't years ago. If you would have said supply chain, the majority of the population wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about. But you can't turn on the TV now, Mauricio. You can't watch news today and not see something in a 30-minute news episode. You're going to see something in regards to a supply chain crisis out there on the news. Do you agree? I mean, it's just crazy how that's pivotally changed.
Right. So if you look back 5 years ago, supply chain was a new terminology. Nobody was paying to supply chain attention. And that's pretty much what happened. We were so focused in cost accounting, trying to maximize profits, and forgetting about supply chain fragility. And once we started seeing a small problem, like that boat that was stuck in the Cairo Canal, everything started to have problems in the world. All of the disruptions, we weren't prepared for it. So now we're actually having supply chain risk analysis to prevent future problems from damaging corporations and companies, because we're so fragile right now from the way we were doing things. And if I were to have an example of a company that was well prepared, I will actually say Toyota. They've been having these experiences with the Fukushima earthquake that was struck Japan in a few years ago, if I remember, it was 10 years ago. And they were well prepared for supply chain disruptions. All the other companies that were trying to maximize their profits and lowering their inventories. And what was Toyota actually doing is increasing inventories. So they were already planning ahead of possible disruptions. They were having between 1 and 3 months of inventory. And they were asking that for their suppliers as well. Some suppliers were having increases in their costs, but I think that from what we saw during the beginning of the pandemic, Toyota was able to go ahead with all of those problems and keep selling trucks and vehicles.
And I think those are lessons well learned in the industry. And I'll tell you, as we look back and we focus on that period of supply chain, we went from our balance of where money is being spent on service and where money is being spent on goods, and we shifted a lot of that service expenditures into goods. And when you buy more goods, and even a few percent makes a huge demand, and not only that I mean, you're talking about millions of more metric tons of goods coming into the country on just a couple of percentage points, shifting from because there was nowhere to spend. We weren't traveling, we weren't going anywhere. We were standing around our house looking and going, you know what, I could fix the kitchen up a little bit. Maybe I do need a new refrigerator, and I need the new fence outside. I'm sitting around the house, I'm not going anywhere. Maybe I do need to do some stuff around here. And these types of things created that need for goods. And what it did was people just started trying to figure out better ways to bring that stuff in. And that demand, where the already stressed supply chain almost broke it completely, right? Just that few percent swing.
Right, so we have different types of disruptions. We have the consumer end that, as you mentioned, we have more time available, so we're looking into ways to consume or to spend our time evenings. We were at home, and one of the major industries that were having or facing new demand was in the construction. So people were going more into Home Depot, looking into ways to improve their home appliances, and that was the end consumer creating bullwhips effect into the demand. And because we were already having problems in our supplies, that was also creating a bullwhip effect in our supplies. So all of these bullwhips were creating problems and creating more strain and stress into everyday supply chains. So if we were having problem with one industry, all of the other industries are interconnected. And if we have one single node with one single problem, it can create a spread out problem into other industries as well. We share warehouses, we share trackings, we share the ports, we share the trains, and all of this is just creating more problems. But I do agree with what we were saying. It was something that wasn't prepared for.
Yeah, and you know when you and we're sitting here talking about it, we talked about Toyota, we talked about you bring up a couple of good points that I just wanted to touch on, and that's inventory. You know, we're seeing a larger need for developing and expanding inventories, current inventories, right? And managing current
Right.
inventories better than we ever have before because of these supply chain to minimize these supply chain eruptions. Correct?
Right. So there's few points that we should be making clear, and I appreciate that you take this point, this topic. First of all, we've been focused too much into lean management, and I'm a lean practitioner. And plenty of companies was were making this mistake was reducing inventories, and it's never been about reducing inventories, always been about optimizing inventories. And while other companies were reducing their inventories to one or the lowest they could be to zero, Toyota was actually increasing inventories. So they were already prepared for disruptions into their supply chains. They were already having safety stocks more than other companies. So inventories is not about reducing. Inventories is about preventing or reducing fluctuations into disruptions. That's one thing. The other thing is um, I was actually taught this by Toyota while I was working with a project with them. Um, a company or a shareholder, for every dollar a shareholder puts into a company, 10% goes into administrative costs, 20% goes into operations, and 70% of that dollar, 70 cents of the dollar, goes into supply chain, inventory, logistics, transportation. So we've been focused too much for the last 40, 50 years just in the operations and the administrative costs that we've forgotten too much about lead times and inventory and logistics. So all of those 70% of the dollar has been forgotten. We took it for granted. We took it for granted our planning system. We took for granted our warehouses, and we took for granted our logistics, our truckers. And now that we're facing problems, that we put in thin margins into those 70% of the dollar, now we're seeing problems in those areas. So those are also opportunities. Now that we're facing problems and challenges, we're seeing opportunities into how we can improve our warehouses, how can we improve our supply chain planning, and how can we improve our trucking industry and the way that our truckers do their work.
And I'm going to ask a quick question to you, Mauricio. I got here in my notes. What do we need to know about Industry 4.0? I'm not sure I know what that is. Could you tell me what that is and what that means?
Right. So IIoT or Internet of Things or Industry 4.0 are kind of a supply chain buzzword of a few years ago, and now Industry 4.0 is starting to become a business terminology. And basically, what it does is using digital software and robotics into our supply chains, our operations, and our manufacturing to improve efficiencies and go ahead into increasing competitiveness. So, if a company was having a person doing a assembly line, working in an assembly line, final assembly. Now we're helping with collaborative robots into increasing production, doing more work with less things, or doing less work and achieving more things.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into technology's role in how we're going to help benefit some of these supply chains, and not just that, but how are other ways technology is going to help us be better? Because I think that's one thing that we do well here. I think we see a problem, it jumps on us, and then we figure out a way to handle it back. But really, I think necessarily we're going to have to use different technologies, not just one or two, but all forming technologies to be better at this logistics chain going forward.
Right, and sometimes less is actually more. So we've been going forward with reducing inventory, reducing inventories that we created or we found about a possible problem around that. And what I've seen and we've seen is that there's more systems using AI, more information, more visibility, and faster communications between silos and functional areas. And that can actually create nervousness, which is the planning or the MRP, the planning system is actually updating more often than our systems can actually react to. And that can also create more inventory. And what people or companies are actually doing is putting more information, which creates more inventory, which creates higher costs. And what people is actually doing is trying to manipulate the ERP systems into going in for less inventory. I'm gonna add two people, Carol Patak and Chad Smith. They're partners with the Demand Driven Institute and connected with the Association for Supply Chain Management of America. And what they're actually showing with their new methodology, which actually was 20 years ago, the demand-driven planning is how we can do more planning with less information, because more information can create nervousness. And it's basically putting firewalls. So firewalls, when the consumer end goes into Home Depot and they're trying to create better home improvements, we put a firewall into that planning, into the point of sale. And when we're having problems into our supply production that we're having in other countries or other raw material sources, we put a firewall into that planning and we create buffers to kind of reduce those types of problems or disruptions. And I do believe that with those types of methodologies that we're introducing, you're going to find that into Coca-Cola for Africa, Shell company, Aptiv, which is a major automotive supplier. Those companies are already using these methodologies, and that's where we're also helping with the supply chain 101 to teach and deploy this type of new methodologies and knowledge.
You paid a bunch of keywords that I tried to zone in on what you were saying. I get that you're utilizing like a software to help buyers and purchasers to not react too quickly or to certain trends that aren't long-term trends but are short-term trends, to try to measure that buffer is what you're basically trying to say, right? Just kind of measure those panic moments and allow the purchaser or the buyer to move their inventories in a more steady stream, instead of in a more trend line, instead of these huge spikes and valleys, right?
Right. So in a perfect world, we will see somebody going into a store, purchasing something. The warehouse will give that product. A planner from a distribution center will simply say, okay, somebody took a gallon of milk. I'm going to request a gallon of milk from the purchasing agent. And the purchasing agent is going to request to the trucker, which is going to be transporting the milk from the factory. That's the perfect world. If we were
It doesn't
to
happen
have
like that.
1 day lead time, right?
It doesn't happen like that already, Mauricio. That's not how it works.
It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that. What we're seeing is disruptions. What we're seeing is lead times that are over what we have for our planning horizons. And what we have to do is normally putting safety stocks. And the problem with that is we cannot have too much of inventory because it costs to the shareholder. So we as planners, purchasing agents, we have to manage and trick. There's this saying that a planner is actually a magician who has this magical who's always trying to find the perfect solution, because if we were to follow what normal ERP or MMRP systems will tell us, it will create more chaos. So that's why we have planners to create the decision making if we were to decide to follow or not a planning plan. So that's the disruption that we're having. And once the planner has the master schedule or the planning execution for the whole week, he or she is going to try to translate that into the purchasing agent. So 1 week for the planner is going to translate for 1 month or 3 months for the purchasing agent. So the purchasing agent has to multiply or forecast or try to guess 3 times as much as the planner. And that goes into more trackers bringing in more of what we don't need and less of what we actually need, because there's so much information being multiplied across for weeks and months of what we actually don't need. So that's the problem that we're facing. We don't know what we're going to have to bring in tomorrow, because we don't know what we're going to have to supply for the end consumer. And if we were to put in an example, toothpaste. 70 years ago, we were only having one single SKU or one single option of SKU. If you remember Ford, that quote from Ford, he will say, everybody can have any vehicle they want as long as they request it in color black. But now we have green colors, we have blue colors, and for the toothpaste, we have over 150 SKUs. We have shell toothpaste, we have no-fluor toothpaste, we have different types of color for toothpaste, we have even Easter egg toothpaste. I don't know if there's going to be a summer toothpaste edition, but what I'm going with this is that there's so much products, and that only adds more complexity of what we have to plan and what we actually have to bring into our distributions and supplies.
All right, Mauricio, I'm going to ask you to look into that crystal ball that you were talking about earlier, that moment. Look into there and tell me where we're going to be in the next year or the next couple of years with supply chain and the patterns of supply. Tell me where we're going to be.
I think the companies are going to start looking for more digital options. And now what we're actually having with GPT-3 or GPT-4 in the next coming days, which is technologies for AI, that's going to be helpful for companies and supply chain people to forecast and trying to find answers and patterns into the future. So that's going to be helpful for more companies in the coming years. If I were to guess, and from what I've seen in the market right now in this last year and this current year, companies are deploying quickly into these new type of solutions using AI for their planning tools.
All right. Well, I do appreciate it, Mauricio, and I thank you for you thrown us with a lot of data, a lot of information. I appreciate you making some of the most difficult things simple for us to understand. We may ask you back here on the show again. I appreciate you coming on. But before you get out of here, we ask all our guests, if you could say your name, who you work for, and that you're watching BCB Live, the safest station in the nation. Can you do that?
Of course, of course. I'm Mauricio Solano. I'm with BCB Line, and this is the safest station on the nation.
All right. Thanks a lot, sir. We appreciate you. Appreciate you for coming out.
Hey, bye. Thanks for inviting me. Take care.
Right. All right. Bye-bye. All right. That was Mauricio letting us know a little bit more about some of the supply chain and over there at Supply Chain 101, trying to introduce and educate the much needed information to people coming within the industry